Hey there, how's everyone doing?
Hey, Jared, welcome. Thanks for being here
Of
today.
course, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, excited to have you. Community members are trickling in. I believe that we have the recording started, so I'll just get the show on the road. Good afternoon, Whale Coin Talk community. My name is Noah. I'm very excited here to have Jared Winn. He is the former Binance Senior Vice President and currently a growth hacker, which we're going to learn more about, of Winn Solutions. And Jared, before we get started getting into the nuts and bolts of things, I think our audience would love to hear your origin story, right? So, what kind of work did you do before getting into the industry, and what made you get involved with Web3?
Sure, and thank you for the introduction there. Much appreciated. I guess it goes back. My whole ambition in life was I always enjoyed learning, but more than learning, I really enjoyed teaching people and educating people. That started from being a tutor and then having the ambition of being a teacher at some stage until ultimately I found that it wasn't the most lucrative of directions. But I've always been a nerd as well, right? And in high school and everything, that doesn't help you out much. But leaving high school, I found little niches that I could find myself in where I could teach people about technology and things of that, starting with like working at cell phone stores and whatever else. And that kind of like springboarded me to working into startups in the Silicon Valley, where, I did everything. I did marketing, biz dev, sales, you name it. Basically, there was no job too small for me. And I really enjoyed it, basically working at these tech startups and helping them to evolve and grow. And some of these startups I joined as employee number 5 that then scaled to 100 to 200 plus people. And, all of the startups, they were all, somehow connected through tech or something of a complex project, which I really enjoyed. I guess dumbing down and helping, any audience understand what something so complicated could be. And from that, I ultimately kind of jumped into crypto because I saw crypto as this opportunity, this landscape of, wow, cryptocurrency is amazing. But what's more interesting is blockchain. And what's more fascinating is that there's so many fascinating use cases out there. And seldom do people really understand what they do. Or like seldom do the creators of these projects get the appropriate messaging and strategy behind them to reach their end audiences in the way that they need to hear things. So I decided to dive into crypto. And then, less than a year later, I was essentially hired at Binance as a senior vice president. We can dive into that, but that essentially is what brought me into crypto and to where I really got my pinnacle role of having worked with Binance.
Beautiful. So, first follow up question to that is you said you got into crypto. What year did you get into crypto? And then what happened between you getting into the industry and then you working at Binance?
So 2016, end of 2016, beginning of 2017, got into crypto from trusted friend. Between then and working at Binance, I lost a ton of money, which that's where most people kind of drop out. But I'm kind of a stubborn person where I'm like, okay, for if I lost this much money in the process of trying to make money in crypto, somebody else profited, and I'm gonna find out what I did wrong. And I became very enthralled with the premise and having lost a lot of money, it took me many years to actually get that money back, but I knew that there was another way. And that's where I became ultimately enamored with the space. And so, having started, head first into crypto after leaving my jobs in the Silicon Valley, I just basically started working with other individuals in the crypto space and seeing like what areas do they need help with. And everybody needed help with marketing or branding or things of that. And the crypto space is so young that it gets a lot of brilliant minds, but seldom do those minds ever have the experience of having worked in the Silicon Valley and learning organizational structure and things of that nature. And so that's where quickly I kind of learned that I had a bit of a niche that I could jump into this.
Beautiful. And tell us more about your experience at Binance, right? What kind of work did you do? Did you start out as a SVP or did you kind of work your way up? What kind of work did you do at Binance? And also, why did you ultimately leave? Would love to hear about your career path there.
It's really funny. The Binance kind of just happened as, I was always putting myself out there. I was always going to conferences. I was always getting speaker opportunities at conferences because I always led first with like, how can I help you, right? So I would help conferences get, the right types of attendees or the right types of businesses that would otherwise be sponsoring. And then they'd be like, what can we do for you? And I'd say, well, do you have a speaker slot, right? And, because I always loved talking and just kind of helping again educate. And so one time I ended up on a panel with Binance, and it was about blockchain for good. And essentially, we were talking about the various use cases and how blockchain could help philanthropy and transparency and just overall integrity to these NGOs. And Binance was talking about Binance Charity. And after the panel, I was like, there's something to say that someone as active as myself in cryptocurrency, having not heard of Binance Charity, I think that there could be more done with your brand in so many kind ways. And they listened, and I said, let me help. And, they didn't ask for it. I just went ahead and started getting them placements in Forbes and Bloomberg and CNN and Fox and all of these Western entities that, they didn't have a lot of exposure to, that I was able to basically get them, these opportunities. And long story short, they finally said, well, why don't we start paying you for this? And they said, we'd like to make you the senior vice president of this charity division and so forth. Well, you'll be doing various campaigns and so forth to continue to help our brand and, help us in a positive light in that respect. And so I did that for an extended period, and ultimately, I think what it came down to for me with Binance was I made a ton of relationships. It was actually one of the best employment experiences of my life. The unfortunate part was I'm kind of a lone, I guess. How do I put it? I definitely have my own drive when it comes to wanting to do my own path and so forth. And when I was working with Binance, it was during the peak of COVID, and so when you're in COVID, essentially working, you're at a remote job, you're working 24/7. And I found that I was losing focus on some important areas of my life, such as my children and my family. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm just going to take a bit of a break here, and ultimately did so. And that's when, Winn Solutions, my advisory agency, ultimately blossomed. And I had no anticipation that it would. That's kind of what propelled me to where I am today.
Beautiful. And I want to talk more about Winn Solutions. I was planning on asking about it later, but let's just jump into that and we can circle back to the earlier questions. Jarred, what exactly is a growth hacker? And tell us more about that. And also tell us more about Winn Solutions. When did you found it? What kind of work do you guys do? Give us the nuts and bolts explanation, please.
Sure. So starting with growth hacker, it's an interesting term, right? And when you're talking about hackers, they refer to them in color spectrums, where it's black hat, gray hat, and white hat, right? Black hat is the type of hacker that essentially is always trying to, basically profit at any cost of any individual, whether it be stealing funds. I mean, those are the hackers we don't like. Gray hat is the type that literally does as it says. They dance the gray line, where it's not necessarily hurting anybody, but it's kind of like, is that okay that they're doing this? And nothing illegal by any means, but it's something that if somebody heard about it with the appropriate connotations, they'd be like, that's kind of sketch. And then white hat is essentially, the purest of forms, where you're only doing things that have no negative impact on an individual, and there's really no question. And sometimes even doing factors of creating things that combat black hats and things of that. So growth hackers fall in between the white and the gray area, where they are essentially developing mechanisms to get brand awareness and exposure to projects. And it's very difficult in crypto. Working in the Silicon Valley, it's a very rinse and repeat. You have SEO, you have funnels, you have paid advertisement, and so forth. Paid ads is off the table with crypto. So immediately the number one route of reaching audiences is disabled. So to reach and get brand awareness and brand impressions, that's where you kind of think out of the box. So growth hackers are very unique minded individuals that are essentially always thinking out of the box to try to get more awareness to projects, which is exactly the type of minds that crypto needs. And that's why a marketing agency just generically would not work for a crypto company. And to the point of your question regarding Win Solutions, we've been operating 5 years roughly, but the reboot of Win Solutions upon me leaving Binance was more recently, where now we maintain a good 30 employees nationally or globally at this stage, and a lot of operations we do are based out of here in California. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell as to what we do. But think of us as an extended arm to many of the projects that we work with. We essentially are the marketing and creative mindsets that allow them to focus on what they do best in terms of developing complex technical infrastructures. And we are the ones that kind of help it glue together in terms of branding, messaging, and then ultimately reaching the end audiences that would be interested in the product that they're developing.
So growth hackers are somewhere between the gray hat and white hat, unique-minded individuals that are thinking outside of the box to create more awareness for projects. What kind of projects typically come to you guys for your services?
Oh, well, any kind of project. I mean, it could be NFT, it could be crypto, it could be, it could be a layer one, it could be an infrastructure play. There's literally I think that's the beauty of our work is that there's no one size fits all in that respect, where we create a lot of custom tailored solutions in that aspect. But it's definitely the way that we get a lot of our business is through VCs, exchanges, and so forth, where they'll see a project that has great potential and they'll ultimately look at it and say, you have great potential, but you haven't garnered your audience yet. And communities are very chicken and egg of what comes first, the community or the hype, right? So that's where they lean on us to say, okay, we need this project to be at X value or X, volume of community within the next 3 to 6 months, because we feel that they have promise, but we can't, engage with them until they are at certain milestones. And that's where we come in and kind of help out with that.
So each individual project's marketing plan is different, unique. It's tailored towards your specific needs. Where do you see Win Solution in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your grand vision?
It's funny because if somebody asked me that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have fathomed where we are today, right? Where I see us going towards more is right now. I would say that we're at the, you know, eh, if you're looking at a timeline of a business, we're probably in the first to second quarter, right? I see us focusing more towards the first quarter of a business, and that comes from the aspect of venture studio and so forth, where the venture arm of Win Solutions has already been developed. We are very selective with regards to the businesses that we work with, but I do see that expanding further, where we will essentially look towards businesses that we feel have great premise and fund them at an early stage, while also providing a certain reach of our services at that same aspect. So I guess to shorten the answer to that question, I do see us getting earlier in the life cycle with a number of the businesses that we're engaging with. But that is, we're happy where we are very much right now. I just see that as an evolution of any business that's performing and profitable.
And to builders that are listening, that are intrigued by what you're saying, how would they reach out to you? How can they hire you guys, or at least get some insight into what they need to do to grow their brand or grow their ecosystem?
Anybody can reach out to me through Twitter. That's probably the easiest way, since obviously we're listening on Twitter. But of course, you can reach out to me. Yeah, I'd say Twitter or Telegram would be the easiest in that respect.
Beautiful. Jarred, I wanted to get your insights on other aspects of the industry. Before I do, though, is there anything about Win Solutions that I haven't asked about? Obviously, there's so much to dive into, but is there anything that you want to share with our audience?
No, I mean, I think that we covered it very well in that respect. I think that for any company that is looking towards outside advisory is to, look towards companies that have good track records and, listen to word of mouth, get referrals and so forth. Don't trust my word for it. Look, if you are considering a project of any kind, make sure that you have good back channel references. As I would say that in crypto, there's a lot of snake oil in that respect, where you could put forth a lot of effort in terms of developing a relationship with somebody, putting in a lot of investment into them, and then you're not going to get the end outcome in many cases in that way. So just always do your diligence, I guess, would be my final point that I would want to leave off when considering any agency.
It's a great way of putting it, and I genuinely believe that if you've been in this space long enough, you've gone through those experiences. Um, Jarredd, I wanted to kind of circle back and talk more about. I mean, I know you had a lucrative experience before Binance and even after Binance with Win Solutions, but generally speaking, overall, how has your experience in the industry been, right? Share with us the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So just in general, I mean, as a consumer, as a trader, or anything of that, I think like my earliest entry into crypto was, it was honestly, it was kind of like just starting to see behind the curtains of like, okay, there's definitely like I'm losing money here, but that's because shills are oftentimes, you know, not exactly the most trustworthy of sources. Like it took me a lot of opportunity to determine like, okay, you have to be careful on what you trust in the space. And that for me, I think, you know, I always look at something with a magnifying glass, and once you can kind of understand the mechanisms of how something operates or why something is being manipulated, you can almost look towards contraindicators with it to determine like, is there, okay, if this is what they want me to do, why would I perhaps consider the opposite in some case? Or if there's a massive campaign going on Twitter, you know, for a said project, you know, is this the right time to buy, or am I too late? And I think that that's always the consideration that I learned with it was, you know, oftentimes when you hear about it, you're already too late. So the people that I feel that oftentimes did best, and what I started to do was really do my own research of finding out like the underlying mechanisms of blockchain, where the things that lacked were. And then, you know, it's almost like a follow the leader type of thing. And I learned that, you know, through my friend who joined crypto much earlier than I did. He joined crypto because Zuckerberg and the Winklevoss twins and, you know, other big names started to participate in it. So, you know, when you have brilliant minds that essentially are doing something that, you know, you're going in a right direction. And, you know, if it seems too easy to get rich, probably is too good to be true in that respect. And that slowly evolved to me where it was like, instead of chasing this dragon of like, I want to be rich, it was like, I just want to be in an industry that I know is going to be thriving, and it has already started to excel upwards in this adoption curve. And so for me, it became less of a chase and more of a passive income instrument where ultimately I thought, okay, I'm not going to be in this just for a year or two. And like, you know, if it was that easy to get rich, everyone would be rich and then money would mean nothing. It's going to be 5 years, 10 years, and so forth. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years until I actually dug myself out of the hole that I had experienced. So I would say that that for me was the evolution of that mind shift was you're not going to get rich overnight. It's not going to be something that is going to, you know, allow you to go from 0 to 100 in an instant. It's something that if you're going to be in it, just be patient. And patience is ultimately the biggest asset that anybody could have in this market, is the way that I found and what I've been able to learn as a result of being in this market for an extended period of time.
Again, Jarred, beautifully put. And I think a lot of people can relate to being on the wrong side of a wealth transfer, right? You said that in the beginning of 2016, you found all this opportunity, but you were on the wrong side of it, but thought to yourself, hey, someone else might have been on the right side of it. And you've kind of shared insights as to how you positioned yourself there and how you have to, you know, not be here to get rich over time, but it's more about being ahead of the curve in an industry that some might argue is still young, and that could be lucrative in itself, building connections, building relationships, all that good stuff. But what is your, and not financial advice, audience member, Jarred, how has your strategy changed? And I can tell you with me, I got in 2017, and my strategy in 2018 initially was, you know, without giving too much detail, is tried to multiply my Bitcoin as much as I can. Ultimately, it led me down the wrong path, and my strategy is more, it shifted more towards DCAing into assets, crypto assets that I believe in long term. And
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what your strategy is to be on the right side of that wealth transfer.
DCA is honestly the number one thing that I tell anybody when they're getting into crypto, is that, you know, buy in small increments so you get a averaged entry of some kind, right? And I think that for the things that changed for me was, you know, when you get into crypto, there's all these shiny objects. You see, wow, this project outperformed, and you jump over there, and then this project outperformed, so you jump over there, and it's almost like changing lanes in traffic. When you change to one lane, everybody else is thinking the same thing, so they change that lane, and then your lane starts going faster, right? So there's the same thing of like keeping focus of, you know, okay, if you're going to invest into something, do it incrementally, because just because it's up 100% today doesn't mean that it's not going to drop 50% tomorrow, right? And then furthermore, it was a matter of, you know, wanting to accelerate the way that I was making income through things like margin trading and leverage and all of these things, which ultimately are a huge pit trap. And if you think about manipulation, a lot of manipulation in cryptocurrency happens in the intentions of driving liquidations, where they actually can absorb the assets of other individuals at lower prices and manipulate the market in order to do so. So margin trading is not your friend at all. Like you have you're throwing a dart at a dartboard, hoping for a bullseye with a blindfold, essentially, in which you're going to be on the right side of the wave. And that is where my mindset heavily changed. Was no, never over leverage. Don't buy crypto with credit cards. Don't do things that you think are going to make this quicker. Just ride the wave. Because if I had done that from the beginning and just dollar cost average and Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe some other assets, I definitely would have been in a much better position today.
Jarred, a lot of what you say makes me feel like I'm listening to a playback of myself. I was on a space a couple days ago, and I almost verbatim said the same thing. If I had not tried to get cute in 2018 and 2019, and if I had just stuck to my initial plan, which was, hey, buy Bitcoin and Ethereum every month and hold it, I would be in a much better position than I am today. But you live and you learn, and it sounds like you've done just that. I want to hear about your thoughts on the next big wave of money flooding into the industry, and more specifically, what catalysts, right? What do you think needs to happen in order for more people to not just adopt this technology and invest in it, but to embrace it?
I mean, that's a really good question. And of course, this is all speculative in the way that I see things. And, I think that more utility needs to be adopted out of blockchain. There is so much opportunity for integrity to be brought to different ecosystems. And as we start to do that from an enterprise perspective, I've worked for many startups, and it's like you work on a consumer level and you're making 1%. And as soon as you go enterprise, where there's all this money, that's where you go 100%. And we started to see the inkling of it with Tesla and MicroStrategy and these companies that are starting to, hedge essentially some of their revenue into Bitcoin. And in an early stage, that's great. But it also brings risk, where they're, of course, going to mitigate their risk and ensure that they're selling at certain points to cover their entries and so forth, which is going to cause volatility. It's not until multiple separate entities are essentially doing the same thing and not knowingly fighting against each other, is when you start to get something of a more fair market. And that's what combats volatility and gets less volatility, as we see today in cryptocurrency. So, in my opinion, I think that in short, utility plays, things like carbon credits or things like utilizing blockchain for distributed distribution systems, things of that are going to showcase the real utility to what these systems create and actually create opportunities for these tokens that are actually really sound investment assets or vessels. I think that is going to be what kind of brings in the next wave, which is also going to subsequently bring in a different type of investment income where, if these companies are starting, just as you've seen many ICOs, I mean, these are very small raises that we've otherwise seen. If there's a real use case that could be actually tokenized and run with a full raise and series round and so forth, that's where we're going to see real opportunity for new types of income to come into the space. And that's when we're going to start to see a shift, in my opinion.
Off the top of your head, could you give us an example of what you envisioned, a use case that you envision might do just that?
I think the best one that I see on the horizon is going to be in carbon credits. Carbon credits is, for those who don't know, kind of a new take on combating that of global warming and essentially, battling these major conglomerates and the amount of carbon emissions that they're creating based on, a number of multitude of factors. These credits are essentially going to be served as offsets for the amount of tax that is due based on carbon emissions being created by these corporations. And there's going to be, in my opinion, a struggle in integrity with these credits. And there's going to be also an aftermarket value for these credits, where people will want to buy these credits aftermarket because they're going to be cheaper than paying certain tax rates and so forth. Now, this is not financial advice or anything of that. Do I think that this is going to be something that's going to make somebody rich? No, but I think that it is a way to bring more capital into the ecosystem that is going to otherwise change the way that blockchain is looked at, which is something that I'm very passionate about.
Understood. Jarred, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Binance, Stablecoin, CBDCs, NFTs. I want to talk about these individually, one at a time. You've been in this industry since 2016. Let's talk about Bitcoin first. What do you think? What did you think about Bitcoin back then? What do you think about it now? And what do you think about its future? Just in your own words.
So Bitcoin is kind of dumbfounding to me. It's almost like the necessary evil, if I can put it into terms. Like there are so many things better than Bitcoin. There are so many things that do more value than Bitcoin, have more scalability than Bitcoin. Like you can point them all out, but Bitcoin continues to be the king of crypto. And so what I've found is that you don't fight the king, right? Like it's one of those necessary evils that when people hear crypto, they think Bitcoin, and I don't think anything is going to change that personally. I think that it was the first to market. And what's unique is that typically a first market has a predecessor that overtakes it. In this case, it's not happening. And it's ultimately, I think, what is kind of keeping it afloat is that it has such notoriety and it set the standard. And, it's been ultimately impermanent in that respect. So that said, I think Bitcoin has it has its function and it's a currency transfer and that's it, right? But when you look towards things like Ethereum, where it's like, wow, there's really opportunity for building and scalability and greater transactions per second and more use cases of building layer twos and things of that nature, it's like, wow, here's a token with, or here's a chain with ultimate premise. And it was incredibly ambitious, and I think that it outgrew itself, and we see different things happening now with proof of stake that might be helpful in the long term. But that's where I see that's what makes me more passionate, in my opinion, is seeing chains with more utility than just a wealth transfer, so to speak.
Couldn't agree more on all those notes. And with all that said, do you believe that we will ever see Ethereum flip Bitcoin?
Oh, I think that everything points to that there should be a reason for it, but there are forces greater than what we can perceive, I think, with those who have, I mean, in a way, we're kind of at the beck and call of those with more capital than we can imagine that will determine whether or not that takes place. On paper, it should happen, but from everything that we've seen, as well as mathematically and the amount of capital that it would take for that to actually occur, I don't see it personally. But should it happen? I do believe so.
You've kind of hinted at this, but do you believe that the merge was the right decision and it ultimately put Ethereum on the I guess the best trajectory for success?
I do think that it was the best decision for a number of reasons, but I think that people see success in different ways. I think that a lot of people evaluated the success of the merger to be based on the price and so forth. And for anybody that invested thinking that this was going to be a revolutionary doubling of price or anything of that, I think that everybody realized like, okay, this didn't give anything crazy in terms of price action because people more than anything that drives price action is hype. And hype is, something that's incredibly contagious. And everybody's going to be more hyped up about something, leading up to something, expecting something that otherwise may or may not deliver. And when it doesn't deliver, you see what you see of a sell-off in that respect, right? So I do think that, sustainably, that it was the right move for it. But I think time will tell as to whether or not this is going to drive the results that everybody had hoped for.
So let's talk Binance. As someone that played a pivotal role in at least building part of that ecosystem or expanding part of that ecosystem, what are your overall thoughts about its future? And in what ways do you believe they're distinguishing themselves from the rest of the competition?
Sure. So just to be completely transparent, I can't speak much on Binance due to, of course, having been previously employed there and so forth. But I do think that Binance has positioned themselves very well with regards to the ecosystem, with regards to how they have managed to pivot and otherwise, stay impermanent, I guess you could say, in spite of various regulations and everything that could be possibly against crypto. And I think that when you look at Binance, FTX, and so forth, what you see is you see a level of continuation, right? And what I always tell people is the true test of a company is whether or not they're going to last a bear market. And it's just and I always say after a bear market, the cream is going to rise to the top. And for the companies that have sustained more than one bear market, then they're here to stay. But I'm always most curious about the products or the companies that are being most innovative in continuously developing new features and always trying to push the agenda of further adoption in the world. And I think that we see that from the companies that I highlighted.
So Kevin O'Leary had this little bit where he talks about how 90% of the world's wealth is invested in sovereign pension plans, and those, if they wanted to, even if they wanted to allocate a portion of that to Bitcoin or crypto, they can't because there is a lack of regulation in the space. And he believes regulation needs to start with stablecoins. So I'll pass the torch to you on this. And one, do you believe stablecoins should be regulated in some capacity, whether it's like banks or in another capacity? I know that a recent U.S. draft bill by the House lawmakers aims to do just this, but what would that mean for the crypto industry and the world of financial services as a whole?
I think that there will be a level of adoption with cryptocurrency that will involve regulation, and there's a point where regulation, it's kind of an equilibrium point. To the left of it, regulation stifles the growth of cryptocurrency, and to the right of it, regulation is going to improve upon the adoption of cryptocurrency. And I think that that's going to be the pinnacle, I guess you could say, as to when things are going to shift, in my opinion. Now, I think that regulation, though, for those who are currently in cryptocurrency, is not going to be the best of worlds. I think that the mindsets and the personalities or the personas in cryptocurrency that otherwise are a huge component of it right now value many things. One of those values, I would say, privacy is core, right? In doing a regulation or something of that with anything on a ledger-based technology, you are going to surrender a certain component of that privacy. And that, as an American, I think that we're used to it. I think that it shouldn't be anything that we're surprised of. We're already seeing things of a digital currency being developed in China and so forth. I think that it's inevitable that this is the way that things are going to go. But I don't think it's going to be the chains that we see today of USDT, USDC, or anything of that. I see there being a private chain in which government would have all visibility to it, and others would not, and that's largely a big hindrance, and why technologies such as ZK rollups and snarks and things of that have otherwise been of interest to the government, in which, there's right now this aspect of programmable privacy is hindering whether or not enterprises are going to use blockchain. Because why would an enterprise company want another enterprise company to have direct access to their order books and see exactly what they're transacting, right? Not to deviate too far from the main point and subject, I do see regulation on the horizon. I see that happening earlier with regards to, just overall enforcement from a tax liability and so forth. But I do see on the long term that there will definitely be government involvement from both a global perspective and a country-based perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that obviously leads us to CBDCs, and I think that you already kind of conveyed your feelings about kind of a centralized private blockchain that's controlled by a single entity. Are there any? Is there a silver lining here? Is there anything good about CBDCs that we should be aware of?
I'd honestly have to think about it, but in honesty, those that would be using CBDCs would, or be, anyway involved in those ecosystems, wouldn't be the people that are listening to this Twitter space, right? That would be more of the general public that are otherwise, I guess, benefactors from lower cost transactions or things of that nature. And I could see it as, it would be more of a kind of a cutting edge play by a bank than it would be for any benefactor for that, where you can get something of low cost transfers internationally, things of that nature. Like, I could see it being something that's something of a glue of various ecosystems together. But that said, it's hard to say of a way that I could see that positively impact the cryptocurrency landscape as we know it right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Couldn't agree more. So, Jarred, let's talk NFTs. NFTs blew up this last bull market, and the NFT communities are still going strong. Be curious to know what your thoughts are on what your thoughts are on NFTs today, and what industries do you believe will see true disruption as a result of NFT technology in the near future or in the distant future?
Yeah, so NFTs today, I think what we're seeing is the life cycle of hype, right? Like everybody jumps in, the prices go up, then you get people coming in with the different intentions of just trying to become more rich, and then when that starts to change, everyone exits, and again, the cream rises to the top, where you still have what's left of, a still passionate ecosystem that will be around for the next cycle and is waiting for the next cycle to happen, right? And I think it boils down to utility with NFTs. Buying I don't mean to offend anybody by this, but buying an animal in the form of a JPEG NFT is not my vision of how NFTs are going to change the world, right? That's a vision of how somebody's trying to get rich or be part of community that they feel shares similar values to them, which in itself, great, no judgment. But in my opinion, NFTs are going to change the way that we basically represent our assets and the ways that we can ensure certain contracts be executed. So whether that be, getting a deed in the form of an NFT on a digital ledger that's immutable, or it's the form of, a music artist getting paid royalties through the form of, customer transactions without a middleman person in that respect. Everything that crypto NFTs and so forth kind of stand for is the elimination of middleman parties that profit off of day-to-day transactions that we all have. But there's for right now, what people pay for in those transactions is trust, in which I'm going to trust this middleman to execute this fair and just. And now, what NFTs are enabling is essentially us trusting in code, in which code is oftentimes, with the exception of hacks and breaches, impenetrable, where you're going to be able to entrust in computers to transact in the way that they have been told. And computers and code don't change based on separation of value, right? For a human or any entity, they could decide, oh wow, this is a transaction of $1 million. I could take that and run right now. A computer is never going to do that because it has no choice other than to follow the instructions that it was provided. And that's where I see NFTs changing things, is continuing that elimination of middleman parties and ultimately reducing costs for those who are involved in the transaction.
Jarred, we don't know when the next bull run is going to be, and in the case of the 2021 bull run, no one really expected NFTs to be the big thing. What do you anticipate next bull run will be the big thing that kind of sneaks up on all of us and takes us by surprise?
In a way, I don't know, don't care. But it's always a matter of, that's why, putting all your eggs in one basket, you're, you have a significantly lower chance of riding that wave, right? We went from crypto to NFTs to metaverse, like, it's essentially people are always chasing this hype, right? And more than anything, it's kind of one, diversifying and hoping that you have your eggs in the basket that's going to be that next wave. And then two, noticing early signs of indication of when that trend could be happening, right? What I say is don't chase that dragon of hoping to be on that. Again, like the rising tide raises all boats. When NFTs go crazy, crypto is going to raise because people need to buy Ethereum to buy NFTs. When Metaverse started going wild, people started going crazy on Metaverse. People had to buy Ethereum or BNB or anything of that in order to purchase the tokens of that Metaverse project that they wanted to be a part of and hopefully get rich from. So again, just being patient and ultimately knowing that you're in the right place is what's going to, I think, be best for anybody that's trying to succeed in this ecosystem.
I share that philosophy, and I couldn't agree more. Jarred, moving on, where do you think the global economy is headed, and also what do you think that means for not just the crypto market, but financial markets, equities as a whole?
So if you've noticed from when we've been speaking, I try to keep something of a positive tone to anything that I answer. And the question that you ask me doesn't necessarily have it's hard to put a positive spin on something. And the positive spin I can put on it is that we are past due for something of a recession in that respect from a global perspective. And with that, what you have is that legacy technologies or legacy products essentially, their utility and use case start to dwindle, and people aren't going to spend money on it, which causes them to retire. And then, it's out with the old, in with the new. So I guess what I can say with regards to how I forecast the way of the global economy being is I see it being a hard couple years personally. I think that COVID was not the cause of it. I think COVID was ultimately the detonation that, contributed to a faster occurrence of it than we may have hoped for. But when we have money essentially being printed and, what goes up must fall, and we are basically setting ourselves up at this point for an interesting downturn in many ways. Now, when I say that, I mean, I don't mean that everybody's going to be stuck eating bread or anything like that. What I mean is that, it's not going to be as easy to invest in assets that are going to be, returning as much value as we've seen in the last 10, 20 years here. So in that respect, the positive spin I can put on it is that everything is cyclical in nature. What goes up goes down, and eventually what goes down goes up when it comes to these markets. And everything in the world, mathematically operates on that of a sine wave, which is essentially a wiggly line that goes up and down in mathematical equilibrium. So there are ways to benefit in these situations, and you can look at what major financial firms and so forth are doing. They're investing in certain goods and certain products that they know, copper, for example, and nickel, these things that are going to be of high demand that otherwise are going to continue to be purchased regardless of their price, right? There are things that you can do to combat it. And so what I would say is that crypto isn't, I mean, crypto as anything is going to be affected, and we're going to see that. And it doesn't mean that you have to get out of crypto or anything like that. It just means that you have to be conservative, in my opinion. And of course, never over leverage yourself, especially in sight of what could be a tsunami.
Nothing, audience members, nothing on this AMA should be taken as financial advice. I always stress this, but I am curious to hear Jarred's insights and opinions. And because of that, Jarred, I'm going to ask, and you've kind of hinted in this, but do you think that we've bottomed?
That is, this is where I would say yes or no, and then people would buy or sell because of what I say. And there's an interesting. What I'll say is there's an interesting mechanic of cryptocurrency is that it really has a difficult time going lower than a previous all-time high, and there's reasons behind that. And where we are right now is very close to that. You can look at anybody's, comments. They could say we're going to 3K, we're going to 5K, we're going to 10K, and what I believe in is, it's harder to do something a first time than it is to do it a second time. And when it comes to this, if we went much lower than where we are, this would be a first time that cryptocurrency essentially has really reached a lower low after these things, right? Of course, it's possible, but that said, to this date, we haven't really seen it. So, in short, I think that if I were looking at it from just my own personal standpoint, I do think that we are pretty low right now. I think it would be much harder for it to go much lower than this. But again, everybody needs to do their own research and make their own decisions on it, because I don't want any DMs telling me that I made somebody make a wrong move, that they lost their investments and so forth. So.
Not financial advice, audience members. I can't stress that enough, but I certainly agree with that sentiment, Jarred. Last question, kind of on markets, but specifically the crypto market. Do you think there's going to be any point where Bitcoin and Ethereum, I don't want to speak for the rest of crypto assets, decouple from tech stocks, rather their trajectory? And
I don't. No, all markets are intertwined. People are going to sell one asset to cover their position on another. That's just the way that markets work. So I don't see there being ever a situation where it decouples. But I've been wrong more than once in life, so it's very possible.
I lied. One more question on this. Why do you think the infamous super cycle never happened?
The infamous super cycle. I think that the people push this premise of a super cycle, that otherwise wanted there to be hype when they were struggling to achieve hype. And by people, I mean, major funds and things of that nature that were otherwise trying to cause an attraction. There's many, many reasons why it couldn't. Like if it was mathematically supposed to happen, this could have been anything of the world economy and so forth. Like there's, think of it as it's waves that you're fighting against. And one wave is going to be bigger than the other in many cases. And the wave that exerted downward pressure on crypto was larger than the amount of demand that there was for it. And that could have been that people just didn't have enough money or didn't want to invest or were scared or, there were things on the horizon that otherwise caused people not to purchase more. So there's, I try to think more from the standpoint of oftentimes the news is manipulated, in my opinion, for the benefactor of others who we don't know, versus just something actually supposed to be happening. And the news tends to disappoint, in my opinion.
Jarred, I wanted to talk a bit about regulation at a high level. I want to start with the US just because so much innovation has come out of this country over the last 200 years. Where do you think we're lacking and how can we improve going forward?
I think so. The US is really in a unique situation. The US is in a situation where we almost are getting leapfrogged by other countries because there can be great ideas and great innovation that comes from the United States. We've seen that. We've witnessed what happens with the Silicon Valley. But unfortunately, we are getting superseded by other countries that are not in as much fear of being regulated and ultimately slapped on the hands by the SEC or the IRS or whichever entity it may be. So the unfortunate part is that regulation in the United States largely stifles what we're capable of because we don't want to fall into a pit hole where we're going to end up in prison or otherwise owing millions of dollars because we reflected something of a pyramid scheme or there's many things that can kind of come from that. Now that said, I think that regulation is in the United States, it's archaic, it's antiquated, it needs to be we're still working in something of a legacy system with regulation in a digital era. So I think that there's much opportunity for there to be, an improvement on that. And I think that we're getting the right minds behind it. The unfortunate part is I think that regulation is largely going to be driven in a way of how can the government profit more from this ecosystem than we already are versus how can we promote the growth of this system because in turn we could get large corporations that are paying more tax dollars. So I think they're looking more of an immediate term versus a growth term, and that's a whole other conversation that we could dive into that I think we could save for another time, honestly.
Certainly. And speaking of getting leapfrogged, I was just in Dubai, and for me, it was quite interesting to see how future positive they were, how they embrace innovation, and how the legislation that they've designed within their infrastructure welcomes people from all walks of life, all across the world, to come and build whatever it is they want to build in their country. I'm curious to know what other countries do you believe are leapfrogging us when it comes to legislation and adopting cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies?
There's known crypto-friendly countries. The BVI is obviously a huge safe haven for most financial instruments. That's been one. Estonia has also provided a number of opportunities for people to essentially have as a safe haven when not wanting to develop in Russia for XYZ reasons, but it's close enough to be able to migrate. We're also talking in terms of Malta, which is a huge ecosystem for blockchain projects, in which they are always trying to attract more projects with various tax incentives and things of that nature. Switzerland is also kind of on the curve in which they have the crypto valley and things of that. So there's a lot of countries that are trying to be ahead of this curve, I guess you could say. And I think it's countries that can truly see where the innovative value lies. I also see it in terms of some countries that are struggling, perhaps Venezuela, where it's like, you know what, we're going to throw a Hail Mary and we're going to be the first ones to do this. And either it's going to pan out for us and we're going to be in a much better spot, or, we're going to be laughed at and put a McDonald's hat on, as, they've so joked about. So that's where I see the innovative aspects occurring is either, we see this as an opportunity and we want to grow more, or, what do we have to lose? So
What are your thoughts on El Salvador being the first country to accept Bitcoin as legal tender?
I think that they have made good strides with that. I think that it was back to that Hail Mary of let's give this a shot. Let's see if this is going to get us out of this hole that we're in. And maybe their timing wasn't optimal. I think that it contributed to a lot of the hype that we saw in this recent run. But I think that as well, it's one of those situations where they were the first domino to drop, and oftentimes whenever anybody's the first to try to do something, they'll get ridiculed as a result of it. But in a few years, who's going to have the last laugh, right? So I think that it was the right move. Perhaps their timing wasn't ideal, but no one ever said El Salvador were financial investors or had the right mindset to make the perfect purchase. But as any crypto enthusiast would say, I think that that's definitely the way of the future, where they're making the right decision.
Jarred, you obviously have a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom to share. I'm curious to know if there's a way for people to learn more from you. Do you sell any courses? Do you have educational content on YouTube, on Twitter? What are some ways that we can tap into the mind of Jarredd Winn and kind of not take your insights as financial advice, but more as nuggets of wisdom that we can then expand upon and do our own research and kind of make our best educated decision?
It's always been something of my desire to create a podcast or something of this where I would speak on various subjects. And, it's just one of those things that ultimately I never had the amount of time to dedicate towards it. Right. So I think that, anybody that wants to, I guess, hear more from me, the easiest way is to follow me on Twitter, follow when I'm going to be on Twitter Spaces and so forth. And hopefully in the coming months, as things stabilize. We're in kind of something of a hyper growth right now with our advisory agency, where my attention is oftentimes divided with that. But in the coming months, you could see me on more spaces or even more podcasts in that respect.
Sweet. And is there anything else you're up to in the industry currently? I mean, I'm sure that Winn Solutions takes up a huge chunk of your time, but any side projects, anything you're excited to share with us?
I am going to be working more in the philanthropy sector in the coming months. We have a few product visions in that respect where, I always find that life is a balance. Just as much as you should be driving towards making money and having a good life, you should equally be, equalizing the curve, so to speak, and helping those that are less fortunate. So there are some things on the horizon with that. It's still very early in stealth mode in that respect, but, stay tuned. I think that you'll see something exciting there. But, you won't see anything from me where I'm doing hype or anything for that for a project or anything that's just like trying to get token buyers or anything like that, because I'm definitely well beyond that part of my curve, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. And I know you want to keep things under wraps for now, but just curious to know more about your philanthropic aspirations. What areas of the world, what do you think needs the most attention right now?
I think it's all about what people are most passionate about, right? And that's, in my opinion, finding things that people are most passionate at will drive people to causes. And when you can drive people to causes and interlace that with cryptocurrency and blockchain, you have an opportunity for education. And so that's where my goal is that if we can find things that really drive people's passion the most, and ultimately incentivize them or reward the things that they're passionate about through their various interfaces of the cryptocurrency world, that we can incentivize them in a way other than just trying to get rich, and in a way that's otherwise benevolent and making an impact. And so I have my own visions as to things that I'm passionate about, just as the next person does. I think that accessibility of finance and technology is probably one of my most passionate instruments, in which there are areas of this world that don't have internet still, and there are areas of this world that have no ability to send and receive money or anything of that to other countries or anything of that, because their banks are otherwise stonewalling them. And I think accessibility is key, and that is something that I am passionate about, and I think that has driven me further in cryptocurrency.
Mm. So we've talked about smart investing, DCAing into the right assets, making sure you're at least diversified enough into the right baskets that you hopefully hit the nail on hit the nail on the head. But for those that are just getting involved in the space, or for those that are in this industry strictly so far as investors, what would be your advice for them on how to get more involved on the building side, get more involved? I mean, you mentioned that you'd go to conferences, you would network, you'd make relationships with people, you would offer ways to help them, right? And you do it free of cost. So like, apart from those things, what advice would you give for newbies or those that are just getting their feet wet, with respect to being a part of this space as more than just investors?
Lead with passion. It was Seneca who said, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." And if you want to get into this space, prepare yourself for it. Be ready for an opportunity to come your way. And I'm a believer in fate and following the flow of life. And if you want something bad enough and you give yourself opportunities for that, that means going to conferences or becoming more active part of an ecosystem, or contributing in a way that you feel that you're making a difference to the widespread adoption of this. That's what luck is my opinion. Is you have the vision, give yourself the opportunities alongside that preparations in order to make them come to fruition, and do it with the right intentions. More than anything, people are going to be able to sniff out whether or not you're just trying to make a quick buck, and they're not going to be interested in it. If you do something where you have no intentions other than being able to help something that you're passionate about, people will smell that and see it and reside with it. And that's where, in my opinion, that's where there's real opportunity in this space, is genuine acts that otherwise result in friendships, relationships, business partnerships, and so forth.
There is one of my favorite books growing up, called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. There's a quote that's like, when you want something with all your heart, the universe conspires to help you achieve it. And I think that encapsulates what you just shared with us. Jarred, I know that you're very busy and I don't want to keep you too much longer. We're almost at the top of the hour. But before you leave, is there anything that I haven't asked about, anything on your mind that you would like to share with our audience and our community?
No, and I think what you said, is just as if in that book when he was in the desert, and all it took for him was willing these forces, and essentially getting them to understand his position, and ultimately putting his heart out there as to his intentions. Right, like things happen. Right, like, that book is amazing for that aspect, and I think that that's where, firstly, anybody should read that book if they haven't read it yet, is it will truly show you that in life there's nothing more important than the journey you're following. Right, and what I would say is that cryptocurrency just equally is a journey. Right, don't have your eyes set at the end of the rainbow looking for the pot of gold. Just know that what you're in is otherwise a ecosystem of opportunity, and regardless of the price, it's always going to be here. And that is what I think really helps people in this space that have been here longer than 1 year, 2 years, is knowing that it's going to be here, and it's always going to have the use case and proposition that has been unmet by anything else in this world. So that said, I really appreciate everybody listening. This has been a fantastic space. Thank you for having me. And if there's ever anything that you guys need, feel free to reach out.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Jarreds Winn. Jarreds, again, I can't thank you enough for being here today. It's been an honor and pleasure to host you. And I've learned a lot. We've learned a lot. And I wish you nothing but success and the best in the future. Audience members, thank you for joining today. Remember that everything you hear on Whalecoin Talk is for educational purposes only. None of what you hear is financial advice. So be safe out there and only invest in things